Assalamu alaikum. Welcome in our first lecture in the study of the nervous system. We are starting with autonomic nervous system, which is a small entity of the nervous system. Today we are speaking about introduction to the autonomic nervous system. Before we enter in the details of the autonomic, we have to know a general idea about the structure of the nervous system. However, the details of the nervous system will be discussed later on in the lectures of the central nervous system. So our nervous system every second receives thousands of informations. These informations regarding our senses, regarding the picture we see elsewhere, regarding the sounds that are present in every site in our environment, regarding the senses over our body, the sense of the cold, the temperature, the sense of touch, vibration, or even the senses inside our body like the sense of pain, the sense of thirst, the sense of hunger, and later on. Our nervous system analyzes this information every second. Sometimes this stimuli may need a response from our nervous system. For example, when you feel hot, you have to get rid of a part of your clothes and so on. Sometimes CNS has to do nothing, just identify the changes in the surrounding environment. Regarding the structure of the nervous system, first the neuron. As we know, the neuron is the structural and the anatomical unit of the nervous system, and its detailed structure will be discussed in histology subject. However, now we are talking about the general aspects of the neuron. As we know, the neuron is formed of two main parts. The first part is the cell body or the soma. The second part is the cell processes, and the cell processes are two categories. The first is the dendrites, the second is the axon. There are some differences between the axon and the dendrites. The dendrites being multiple and short branching, while the axon is a single long process. The dendrites collect impulses and direct them towards the cell body, so they act as a receptive surface. However, the axon conduct impulses away, it sends impulses away, it acts as a conducting surface. So what is the fate of the axon terminal? Where do the neuron terminate? We have three possibilities. The first is that the neuron terminate on another neuron, forming a chain for transmitting impulses within our nervous system. The site of contact between a neuron and another neuron called the neuron-neural junction or synapse, and we will discuss it in details later on. The second possibility is that it terminates on a muscle cell, whether skeletal muscle or smooth muscle, forming neuromuscular junction. The third final possibility is to terminate over epithelium, whether a simple epithelium or over a gland, forming what is called the neuroepithelial junction. So, for example, this is a neuromuscular junction, and this is a neural junction, and this point is called the synapse, and the third is the neuroepithelial junction with the epithelium or with glands. Functionally, we can divide neurons into three main types: afferent neuron, efferent neuron, interneuron. Afferent neurons are the sensory neurons which conduct impulses from receptors to the CNS. Motor neurons are conducting impulses from CNS to the effectors, whether they are organ or muscles and so on. However, interneurons, they form a link between the afferent and the efferent within our nervous system. These cells, interneurons, lie completely inside our nervous system. Reflex action, a very important topic in biology, and I would like to emphasize on its importance in biology. Simply, when you ask it about reflex action, some persons say when you are are touched by a harmful object, you withdraw your limb away. This is not all about the reflex action. Reflex is a very important entity in biology. All our biological functions are done in the form of reflex action. All details of the respiratory process are done in the form of reflexes. All details of cardiovascular events are reflexes. GIT events, reflexes. So reflex is essential duty or essential entity in biology. It is the functional unit of our nervous system. So any function done inside our nervous system is based on reflex action. To simplify the concept of reflex action, we have the flexion withdrawal reflex as an example, only to simplify the components of the reflex action. Whenever you are subjected to a prick without a harmful object, your pain receptors are stimulated. So the first component of the reflex pathway or action is a stimulation of the receptor by its appropriate stimulus, which is a painful stimulus. Later, the receptor sends impulses via the sensory neuron, which is the second component of the reflex action, which is responsible for transmitting impulses from receptor to the CNS. Within CNS, impulses terminate over the interneurons, which are responsible for processing of information. Later, impulses are conducted to the efferent neuron, which conduct impulses from the CNS to the effector that is present in this side, which is the skeletal muscle, which contracts. And when it contracts, it withdraws the limb away from the injurious stimulus. So we have 5 components in flexion withdrawal reflex: the receptor, the sensory neuron, the interneuron, the efferent neuron, and the effector, which is the skeletal muscle. In reflex, whatever its site inside our body is composed of these 5 elements. Divisions of nervous system: we can divide our nervous system in general into 2 main divisions: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The CNS involves 2 main components. These components are the brain and the spinal cord. These 2 components only are the CNS. They are central in position and they are central in function. However, all other components of the nervous system are considered peripheral nervous system. They connect the CNS with different body organs. They send orders to the body organs in the form of motor nerves, or receive impulses from the organs and transmit them to the CNS in the form of sensory impulses. So when you subtract brain and spinal cord from your nervous system, the remaining is the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is composed of so many types of nerves. First, what about the CNS? As we said, we have the brain and the spinal cord. We have too much details to be studied in the subject of neuroanatomy. However, here I will give a simple idea about CNS. As I said, brain and spinal cord. You can note easily that the CNS is so sensitive structure. So it is protected. It is protected by strong bony cavities, where our brain is covered by the skull and our spinal cord is covered by the vertebral column, because loss of any cell of our central nervous system can't be replaced. Loss of any cell or any center in the CNS cause permanent for life loss of its function. However, the nerve cells can withstand and can live so many years. Scientists estimated that they can live up to 250 years. These are the components of our brain. To simplify the structure of the brain, we have 3 main components. This part is called the cerebrum, and it is composed of 2 cerebral hemispheres. This part represents about 80% of the whole weight of the brain, and it is responsible for many sensory, many motor, and many higher mental function which characterizes the human being. The second part of our brain is this area, greenish area, which is called the brain stem, and it consists of three levels: a higher level called midbrain, a middle level called pons, a lower level called the medulla. The brainstem is present in human and most of the organisms, and it is responsible for coordinating biological activities like respiration, circulation, GIT, and so on. The third part of our brain is the cerebellum, and it is responsible for maintaining our equilibrium. As we know, the cerebrum is the main part, and it is composed of two cerebral hemispheres. Each hemisphere is formed of a cortex, which is a superficial part, and the deeper parts, which are the brain center. They have many names like thalamus, hypothalamus, basal ganglia, hippocampus, amygdala, and so on. You will study all of these subjects later on. What about the spinal cord? The whole mass of the brain and spinal cord is about 1.5 kilograms in average. This is a simple figure for the spinal cord, and this is its appearance in the cross section as you see. The spinal cord is divided into 31 segments, not 12, 31 segments. And these segments are divided into 5 main regions. First, the cervical, second, the thoracic, third, the lumbar, then the sacral, and finally the coccygeal. Regarding the number of the segment, we have 8 segments in the cervical region. We have 12 segments in the thoracic region, 5 segments in the lumbar, 5 segments in the sacral, and only 1 coccygeal. The total number of segments equals 31 segments. Each segment has a pair of spinal nerves on its side. So we have a total number of 31 spinal nerves. They are in the form of pairs, left and right. This is the cut section of the spinal cord, as I said. After we have finished a summary about the CNS, we have to simplify the concept of peripheral nervous system. As I said, peripheral nervous system is the total number of nerves which connect our CNS to our body organs. They are formed of sensory nerves and motor nerves, whether they are voluntary or involuntary. We have too much nerves, so we have many methods for classifying them according to this subject. First, we have anatomical division. Second, we have a physiological division, and these are the most famous two divisions: the cranial division and the anatomical division and the physiological division. First, regarding the concept of anatomical division, it simply classifies nerves according to their origin. If they originate from brain, they are called cranial nerves. If they arise from the spinal cord, they are spinal nerves. Also, this classification is so simple, it is the most widely used in clinical practice, is to divide the peripheral nerves into whether cranial or spinal. We have 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Regarding the cranial nerves, we have 12 cranial nerves, and they are divided into cranial nerve number 1, number 2, down to number 12. The idea of classification depends on the level. So you put the brain in front of you. The higher one is nerve number 1, then number 2, number 3, and so on. So the lowest is number 12. Regarding the cranial nerves, we can name them and take a simple idea about the function of each one. However, details are present in your anatomy. The first cranial nerve is olfactory, and it is responsible for smell. The second is the optic, and it is responsible for vision. The third is the oculomotor. Number 4, it shares in the eye movements. Number 5, the trigeminal nerve. It is responsible for the sensation of the face, and it has some motor function. Number 6, abducens nerve. it shares in moving the eye. The facial nerve, responsible for moving most of facial muscles. Number 8, auditory nerve. It is responsible for audition. Number 9, glossopharyngeal nerve, responsible for taste and many other functions. Vagus nerve. It has many sensory and motor functions in the thorax and in the abdomen. The 11th nerve, the accessory, it moves the shoulders. The final is number 12, the hypoglossal, which moves our tongue. This is a simple idea about this nerve. Some of them are purely sensory, like number 1, number 2, and number 8. Some are purely motor, like number 3, number 4, and number 6. However, the remaining 6 nerves are mixed nerves. They have both sensory and motor functions. Now I am speaking about some details about the spinal nerves. As we said, each segment has a pair of nerves, right and left. So we name the spinal nerves according to the segment. We have 8 cervical segments, so that we have C1. When I say C1, I mean cervical segment number 1. And also the nerve arising from it is called C1. So we have spinal nerve C1, C2, and so on. Then in the thoracic region we have T1, T2, and so on. To understand well the physiology of the spinal nerves, we have to study the shape of the cut section of the spinal cord. If we have a section in the spinal cord, it differs from a level to another, from the cervical to the thoracic to the lumbar and so on. However, we are concentrating here on the general idea. Whatever the level of the section in spinal cord, you will find in the center there is a small opening. This opening is the central canal. It is surrounded by H-shaped gray matter. This H-shaped gray matter is divided into horns. In the posterior region we have posterior horn. Frontally we have the ventral horn, ventral or anterior, dorsal or posterior, and laterally we have the lateral horn. Also surrounding this gray matter we have the white matter, which is divided into columns. To simplify its structure, again, this is the central canal surrounded by H-shaped material, consists of ventral or anterior horn, lateral horn, and dorsal horn. Also, the white matter is divided into ventral column, lateral column, and the dorsal column. Note that the nervous tissue may appear gray or may appear white. This depends on presence or absence of myelin sheath. The last classification is the physiological classification. It is important, however, it is not so popular like the anatomical classification, which is widely used in the medical practice. Physiologically, we can divide the nerves of the peripheral nervous system into 2 main types. First, somatic nerves. Second, autonomic nerves. Somatic, which supply the body soma, which are responsible for voluntary function. Look at your hand. These structures here are called the somatic structures, the skeletal muscle and their surroundings. Skeletal muscle, tendon, joints, ligament, bone, cartilage, all of these are called somatic structures, and most of them are voluntary. However, inside our body cavities, we have too many autonomic structures formed mainly of smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. Whether this smooth muscle form the GIT, gastrointestinal tract, or the respiratory system, and also the cardiac muscle. So we have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic is voluntary, however autonomic work by itself, it is involuntary. Somatic connected with the skin, skeletal muscle, tendon, joints, and ligament. However, autonomic is connected with the smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. Now we reached the end of the first lecture. See you again in next lecture. Goodbye.